The region of the Congo today is synonymous with civil war and corruption. Its colonial legacy is a stain of Belgian brutality. Yet this is not the true story of Congo. The last century and a half obscure the grand history that lies beneath, a history of wealth, power, and faith, where Congolese kings shared letters with the Pope, conquered across Central Africa, and grew rich from trading with European merchants. The Kingdom of Kongo truly earns the legacy as one of Africa's greatest ever superpowers. And today we will explore their story. This video is part of Project South of the Sahara, a collaboration of history YouTubers dedicated to showcasing the history of sub-Saharan Africa, which is so often neglected on the platform. There will be a playlist linked in both the description and the comment section for you to check out the other amazing videos made as part of this project. Thank you. Now on to the video. Central West Africa before the empire was populated by a collection of kingdoms and city-states, each vying for power and preeminence. Empires had come and gone, but nothing to the scale that the soon-to-be kingdom would eventually encompass. The oral tradition dictates that Kongo's beginning was with the marriage of Nima Nzima of Mpembakase with Lukeni Luenzanze of Mbata, cementing an alliance between the two kingdoms. They had a son, named Lukeni Luanimi, who appears to have been born sometime between 1370 and 1400 CE. He would be the first to hold the title of Mutinu, or king, and thus the founding of the kingdom is dated to sometime around 1390 CE. In truth, much of the early history remains shrouded in mystery. What is known is that Lukeni Luanimi chose the town of Mbaza Kongo as the capital of his new kingdom, and that he soon brought the neighboring kingdom of Mbata, his mother's homeland, under his protection. The Kingdom of Kongo's early expansion was a mix of conquest and vassalization. Many smaller kingdoms joined willingly, offering the Kongo king the right to tax and partially administer their lands in exchange for military protection and access to the interconnected economic system that the kingdom provided. Some have labeled the Kingdom of Kongo a confederation due to these factors, but it seems to have been a unique blend of both federated and direct rule. The semi-confederated way of governance would soon show its true benefits, as it allowed the king to keep a strong rule over a much larger empire. It's unclear just how large the kingdom was, but by the beginning of the 16th century, around 100 years after its founding, the population probably lay between 2 to 3 million people. Its primary natural resources were ivory, copper, salt, cattle, and importantly for the future, slaves. In 1482, Portuguese explorers first made contact with the thriving kingdom, introducing themselves and, more importantly, their religion. 8 years after the fact, the king of Kongo, Nzinga Nkulu, asked to be baptized, and converted to Christianity. He adopted the name of the Portuguese king and became King João I. Along with their king, many nobles also converted. But don't be mistaken, this conversion wasn't about God, it was about gold. Or cowrie shells, because that was their currency, but it doesn't matter. The truth is, being Christian made it easier to trade, and the Portuguese merchants were soon swarming all over the empire. In the later years, Christianity brought along other benefits, like opening diplomatic channels to other European powers, and the ability for Congolese nobles to study in Europe as well. But this didn't mean that Christianity came to dominate the empire, as is reported by some sources. It probably means that some benefits and traditions were adopted alongside the current cultural practices of the region, while the nobility converted more wholeheartedly. In its later history, and mainly with the aid of Christianity, Kongo was able to intensify diplomatic connections across the world, from missions to Brazil and Portugal to negotiate the freedom of captured slaves, to military alliances with the Dutch East India Company. Even today, there remains a portrait bust of the Congo ambassador to the Pope in Rome as a commemoration of his diplomatic efforts. The reason I wish to point this out in specific is that stories like these help break down the myths that still linger today that Africa was some foreign, isolated, and mysterious place before colonization. So with that concluded, let's get back to the story. João's son Afonso I would help push the kingdom into its golden age in the 16th century. He opened communication channels with other European powers, including the Pope himself, and worked to make the Congolese church independent of foreign influences. He flexed the Congo's power over regional trade. He restricted the interior to all Europeans, and confined Portuguese merchants to the coast. Every merchant ship that was permitted beyond the port cities would be kept under heavy guard as they ventured up the rivers. As the colonization of the Americas was the most profitable venture in the world, the Congolese had no issue with capitalizing on the European need for cheap labor. The difference here is that it was forbidden for someone born in the Congo to be sold as a slave. All slaves were instead prisoners of the many successful wars that the Congo was waging against its neighbors during the century. Their profits were unimaginable, but it wasn't an airtight system. There existed a significant underground black market where local Congo nobles would sell Congolese into slavery, and sometimes the Portuguese would straight up raid the coast and kidnap people themselves. Even so, for the first half of the 16th century, all issues seemed to be nothing more than faraway nuisances to be dealt with later. But everything changed when the Fire Nation, the Jaga, attacked. The Jaga to this day are of unknown origin. Their invasion too is hotly debated by scholars. Nevertheless, in 1568, their armies attacked from the southeast and pushed as far as the capital of Mbaza, Kongo, now also known as São Salvador, and sacked the flourishing city. This event spiraled into an economic crisis in which the Portuguese capitalized by increasing their control of the region. This included, among other things, the founding of a city called Luanda, the future capital of modern-day Angola. The kingdom managed to pull itself out of crisis by the 1600s, but the respite was brief at best. Thus, the great decline of the empire began from within. The state of Soyo had been causing unrest since 1593, but escalations led to it declaring independence in 1641. This civil war would tear the kingdom apart. The loss of Soyo, being one of the wealthiest provinces, coupled with the shift to a wartime economy, caused massive disruptions in trade and drained the kingdom's reserves. Meanwhile, the Portuguese pressed their influence now more than ever. Congo had turned back the Portuguese before, but the pressure now was becoming overwhelming. Luckily, they found an ally in the Dutch East India Company, or VOC, which was becoming an active competitor for the Portuguese in the Indian Ocean. Together, they launched a successful conquest of the city of Luanda in 1641. But while the Portuguese were able to bide their time and rebuild, the Congo found itself continuously drained by the Soyo Rebellion. 2 decades later, in 1665, the Portuguese struck back, taking Luanda and killing the King of Kongo in the disastrous Battle of Mbuila. The death of King Antonio I saw the rise of 2 opposing noble factions, the Kimpanzu and the Kinzala, as both began consolidating power in an attempt to control the kingdom. In 1670, a full 29 years after the Civil War began, there was one last attempt to crush the Soyo rebels. Yet despite early success at the Battle of Mbidzi River, the coalition force of Portuguese and Congolese troops were soundly defeated by the Soyo. After this point, the Soyo achieved a relative independence, and there appeared to be nominal peace between the 2 kingdoms. Though, this did not bring peace to Congo. In fact, it would only get worse from here. The internal split between the Kimpanzu and the Kinzala spiraled into a literal split, as in the 1670s, both sides proclaimed separate capitals and separate kings. For the next 40-odd years, civil war raged between both factions. Smaller armies too fought pitched battles from one noble or another. The capital of São Salvador was sacked and abandoned numerous times, and despite being rebuilt afterwards, it would never hold the same grandeur as it once had. Eventually, in early 1715, King Pedro IV of the Kinzala faction managed to subdue his rivals and secure his position as the one and true King of Kongo. Yet the empire was a shell of its former self. Breakaway states, colonial encroachment, and the collapse of the trade system which had so long propped up the kingdom's treasury all took their toll on the ailing state. In 1763, two princes, each from rival factions, once again claimed the throne, and plunged the kingdom into civil war. What followed was a cascade of political strife that would plague the kingdom until its death. As the slave trade became less profitable in the 1800s, and with Great Britain outright banning the trade in 1839, the kingdom saw its last great source of wealth dry up. As was the same for many other African states, the fate of the Congo was determined by the Berlin Conference in 1885. Here it was decided by the European powers that Portugal would occupy what was left of the Kingdom of Kongo, while the majority of the region would be handed to Belgium. So it was that when King Pedro V asked the Portuguese for an alliance to defeat his rival who had occupied the capital, they agreed on the condition that he would become their vassal. By 1888, it was all over, and the kingdom would be officially integrated into the colony of Angola. The legacy of Congo is sadly overshadowed in the modern day by the current instability in the region, and the horrific story that followed of Belgian colonization. Yet it should not be forgotten that for over 500 years, Congo stood strong. They were an African power to rival the colonial nations of their time. They could not be strong-armed into selling their people, nor into abandoning their culture. Instead, they took in new faiths and dictated trade on their terms. While it was a shame that they had to end in such a bloody fashion, the peak they fell from and the heights they reached should not be forgotten. They were not simply the Kingdom of Kongo. They were the Congolese Empire. Thank you so much for watching. My sources are in the description and you are free to check them out to learn more. Please consider subscribing to help support me as I continue to make these videos, and I would like to thank the From Nothing channel for putting together this collaboration. This is the Chronology Cast, signing off.